a moment.
Right.
All right, and that moment is now. Turn my waiting room music off. Okay, so welcome everybody. Thank you for coming to the Women's and Gender Studies Research Series. This is our first presentation of this semester, and this is something that we do the third Thursday of every month, and its purpose is really to expose our faculty and students and wider university community to the research that Women's and Gender Studies faculty and affiliated faculty are doing and topics of interest for you all. So we appreciate your being here. And today, presenting for us, we have Dr. Elizabeth Stevens, who is a lecturer in communication studies. And Dr. Stevens has her PhD from the University of Memphis, and she studies in the areas of interpersonal communication, identity, grief, and health communication. She is the former chair of the Ethnography Interest Division of the Southern States Communication Association, and the research she'll be speaking about with us today. She also has published a related article on this research last year in the Journal of Autoethnography. So we are looking forward to her talk, and she'll be speaking about identity, communication, and bereavement. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberta. The title of my paper is Identifying as a Bereaved Mother, Using the Communication Theory of Identity as a Framework. 995 people were killed by police in 2020, according to the Washington Post newspaper, which keeps the most accurate count among news reporting agencies. Since 2014, when police officers killed Michael Brown, an unarmed African-American man from Missouri, the Post has tracked more than 5,000 police-involved shootings that resulted in death based on statistics compiled by the FBI. The Post reported that fatal police shootings are underestimated by more than 50% due to the following variables. Reporting by police departments is voluntary. Departments may not report police involved in shootings, or they attribute civilian deaths to other causes. The Post also reported that many of the victims are young and non-white men. What effects do these deaths have on the families left behind? Wives, girlfriends, children, siblings, and parents? And you may wonder why I'm interested in this social justice issue. In 2013, my 29-year-old son was killed by police, which was and still deeply is traumatic. I've coped with grief and trauma in various ways, physically, emotionally, financially, and spiritually. And I have received tremendous support from friends and family, and also well-meaning communication that totally misses the mark. I have struggled with my identity as a mother since I began the intensive work of grief therapy. Grief challenged my self-narrative, which Niemeyer, Klaus, and Dennis describe as the stories we tell about our lives, the stories that others tell about us, and the stories we enact in their presence. I wanted to know if other mothers felt the same emotions that I was feeling. So my research began as a reflexive response to deep trauma and grief, as I sought out other mothers like me for this study. I was guided by these research questions. 1, what changes in identity do mothers of sons killed by police experience? How do changes in identity affect the ways in which these mothers present communicatively to others? The death of a child is a devastating event in the life of a parent, and its impact is lasting. In her landmark study on grief, Sanders compared the loss of a spouse, parent, and child, and found that parental grief was the strongest. In a similar study, Rando describes parental grief as more intense, more complicated, and more protracted than those encountered following the loss of other individuals in role relationships. Homicide bereavement, as described by survivors in a study by Miller, is intense, persistent, and inescapable. I framed my study using the communication theory of identity, CTI, as described by Jung and Heck. According to this theory, identity consists of 4 layers: personal, enacted, relational, and communal, that taken together and individually help us understand identity and reveal identity. These layers may conflict with one another. For example, how you see yourself, the personal layer, versus how you act in group situations, communal identity. They may work together cooperatively. All 4 frames provide a comprehensive view of identity and work individually, in pairs, or in any other combination. The 2 frameworks I focused on for my study are personal identity and communal identity. Personal identity focuses on self-cognition and a spiritual sense of well-being. Communal identity examines the way that a group of people or particular community shares and constructs an identity. In this study, I analyzed communal identity among bereaved mothers, then moved back to examining personal identity. But today I'm going to share my findings about communal identity. So this study is a qualitative analysis, and the MTSU IRB approved my sentence. Participants were mothers or sons who were killed by police, 13 in all. The average age of mothers in this study is 52 years old. 50% of the mothers identified as African American, 30% white, 10% Latina, and 10% Native American. The son's age at death was 22 years old on average. Victims were killed in their neighborhoods or cities, with the exception of one who was killed out of his home state. The years since the son's death ranges from 1 to 6 years on average. So my search for participants began with Facebook, and I started with purposive sampling by contacting gatekeepers of social justice groups that I found on Facebook. And they ran groups that lobby for police reform, and other groups were those for maternal bereavement. Then I moved into snowball sampling. I conducted semi-structured interviews by phone because the participants who consented to be interviewed lived outside of Tennessee. Interviews lasted 30 minutes to an hour and a half, and topics covered in the interviews focused on sense-making of experience as they related to the personal and communal constructs of CTI, communication theory of identity. All of the interviews were recorded, transcribed verbatim, and sent to participants for member checks. Data was then analyzed using a thematic analysis, and coders repeatedly read the transcripts for keywords and themes. And we also used in vivo to make connections among the data. So 3 main themes emerged around the formation of communal identity. Those are showing strength, coping with grief, and transformation of self. Strength in this study was defined as the emotional and physical capacity to endure the trauma of a son's death. Strength includes self-perception and others' perceptions. So, showing strength. Using face work, participants described the behaviors they used to stay strong in front of friends, family, and other mothers. SAMP describes face as the desirable self-image that a person wishes to convey to another based upon society's interpretation of what is appropriate. So the mothers felt like they had to stay strong. As one participant said, "I try to put on this front like I'm happy, but of course I'm a wreck inside." Participants associated strength with determination, stating that they would not be diverted from their goal of justice for their sons. In this context, justice is defined as successfully prosecuting the officer responsible for their son's death or reopening the investigation into their son's death. One participant said, "Another mother that I associate a lot with, we are both strong-minded. We speak out a lot. A lot of people reach out to us." And another participant whose son died 2 decades ago said, "I've made a conscious decision, and I know that my mind is what I allow to move me, not my heart all the time. and I've made up my mind that I would be about the business of getting justice for my child, but not just for my child, but other people's children as well. As stated in the definition, strength includes participants reflecting on others' perceptions of their strength. Many participants recounted personal encounters with city officials and police officers in which they showed agency and bravery, such as this participant. I saw the police officer that caused my son's death. It was a couple of days before the anniversary, and that was the first time I'd seen him in person. And he got a few choice words from me. He couldn't even look me in my face. He was just looking with his head down. There was so much built up, and I said, "It's time to let it go." But it kind of scared me. I called him a murderer, a child murderer. Her son was 17. The opportunity to confront the officer who killed their children is a fantasy goal for most of the participants. A fantasy because they think about confronting their son's killer, but do not believe that they will ever have the occasion to do so. One participant traveled to the police department responsible for her son's death once a month to request the police report. She said, "I got a lot of looks from the police like, 'Oh, gee, she's back. Here she is again.' Well, I'm going to keep on until I get my answers that I need." And a participant who regularly speaks at rallies said, "So many people come up to me, they don't even know me, and they're like, 'You're the strongest person in America.'" And I'm like, "Yeah, you think so? If you only knew." The next theme I mentioned was coping, and it is defined as mothers finding ways to manage emotional and physical grief. Participants described two approaches to coping with grief: seeking help for themselves and by helping other mothers. Coping for self also includes telling the story of their son's death to release their grief, connect with other mothers, and speak out as a survivor. One participant said, "I can't help myself. Being around other mothers helps me through the process. I've got to be my son's voice, and that's how I continue living. Because if I don't tell the story, who is going to tell it?" Coping by helping other mothers includes providing emotional support, physical support, and advice about the process of grief and trauma. One mother said, "I'm honest with mothers when they ask if it gets better. No, it doesn't get better. What you do is you adjust, you adapt." And another participant said, "It's difficult, but I like to share it. I don't like to hide it because I don't feel like it should be hidden. I've lost some friends because I'm kind of rough and honest with how I feel. I started devoting my time to helping other mothers with websites and business cards for their organizations, and I learned about their children, what happened to them. It sits really heavy on me sometimes." To help them cope, many of the participants in the study sought out therapeutic counseling, but discovered that the therapists they chose were not equipped to help them. So participants either sought out other therapists or just stopped trying. The last theme I will cover is transformation. It's a shift in identity from who I was before my son's death to who I am now after his death. Participants spoke of positive and negative transformations, such as this mother, and described feeling a push and pull as their identity shifted to that of bereaved mother. She said, "Before my son's death, I was the overcomer, really strong. I had overcome some struggles and rebuilt my life. Now I just feel defeated." They described behaviors that they would not have performed before their sons died. In addition to speaking out for their children, participants also felt the urge to speak out for all victims. This participant said they, the mothers, need to hear from someone who not only has suffered this injustice as a family member of a victim, but also somebody who said, "Okay, I'm not going to let my grief rule me." Another said, "I do a lot of public speaking. I speak all the time with Michael Brown's mother and Eric Garner's mother. I've spoken at events with Trayvon Martin's mother. I wouldn't have spoken in public before. And finally, another mother said this about transformation. And when I make up my mind to do something, that's exactly what I do. Because the fact of the matter is they, the police, expect us to be all emotional all over the place, not be analytical about what we are doing, not being able to handle ourselves well, right? And I just choose to take a different path. One idea that resonated through the interviews was the need to lean on one another for support. As one participant said, you need to stick together because it helps. It helps being around other mothers. When you go through it and you think it's just you, and then you realize when you talk to someone else, you say, oh my God, I experienced the same exact thing. The mothers who participated in the study experienced life-changing shifts in identity. Participants made an involuntary shift in identity to the communal identity of the mother of a son killed by police. They bear the trauma of telling their son's stories in addition to their stories as bereaved mothers. They also became members of a muted group based on language, gender, race, and simply being survivors. But I'll save that discussion for another day. 5 of the 12 participants started activist or support groups to help themselves and other mothers cope with grief and the after effects of their son's homicides. These groups function mostly as interpersonal support, in which mothers learn how to receive public funds to help pay for funeral expenses, receive peer-to-peer support, such as listening, receive monetary support to meet short-term unexpected expenses, relate their legal experiences to other mothers in the hopes of helping them, attend or plan conferences that help bond them together, form groups to protest police shootings or attend city council meetings, and learn to lobby policymakers about changes in policing. Each participant in the study gathered all of the artifacts related to their son's homicides: news articles, police reports, most of which are redacted, audio and video recordings, dash cam video from police cars, autopsies, and trial transcripts. These are the reminders of their son's lives and deaths. I will leave you with this fact gathered from the interviews. Out of the 13 interviews and cases, only one case is being successfully litigated. All of the officers who killed the young men described in the interviews have received department commendations for the deaths and did not lose their jobs. As one mother said, I'm not going to give up. This is not the path I wanted to take in my life. But of course, none of us did, right? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Stevens. We have a good amount of time for asking questions and responding to the topics that Dr. Stevens has shared with us. And feel free to post questions in the chat or unmute yourself and jump in. I see a couple of my students out there. Hi, good to see you.
Hello.
Jakia. I can go ahead and make the first comment. Oh, wow, I'm in someone else's image too. One thing I was thinking about during your presentation was I feel as though we do think a lot about the individuals who died. You know, we think about Michael Garner and Michael Brown and Eric Garner, and then the people you've said who have gotten like a lot of media coverage. And while you were speaking, I was thinking about the kind of the impacts on, as you mentioned, a lot of your participants were non-white. And I was just kind of thinking about how your research gives insight into kind of the grief and mourning and the impact on communities of losing someone, how that branches out and impacts everything.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of shame associated with this type of death, and a lot of, I'm just making a guess here, but many people don't want to talk about it. So it stays muted. It stays under the surface. And I think that's really hurtful to communities not to have these kind of dialogues about police involved shootings. But that's what I found or that's what most of the mothers told me, is that there was shame involved with the shooting and that they didn't feel like that they could speak out publicly too much about what had happened.
In the chat is a comment from Skylar says, I agree with Roberta, the long-lasting effects stick with the people left behind while they battle justice and grief.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And justice, as we see in the media, is not easy to come by. I read yesterday that the police officers responsible for a man's death, I believe in New York, that no charges were pressed, they didn't have any charges against them. And so you're left with this incomplete feeling that no one has truly looked into the death and, from a more neutral standpoint. So many of the cities have this system where their city attorney examines the shooting, and they usually rubber stamp that and say that police were justified. A lot of cities don't have neutral people to look at the event of the shooting. So yes, it leaves the community with distrust, upset, long-lasting grief.
It looked like, Jerry, did you have a comment?
Yep, and you're right, I was muted. Can you hear me now? Okay, Elizabeth, you mentioned that there was this shame, or I don't remember what your other words were, but I was wondering, I don't know, I don't think I live under a rock, but I've been at MTSU since 2012. That's almost 9 years. I don't remember ever hearing your story in our department, or maybe it was told. Was it?
It was, and I had a really well-meaning friend at the time that this happened in the department, and she told people not to contact me and not to ask me about it, which, at that moment. But I think because of that a lot of people didn't know about it. So I think that's why, probably, Jerry.
I mean, most of us would have wanted to share your grief or be supportive or send you something. I'm just shocked that this is the first time I've ever even heard anything about it.
Well, there were people in the department that I knew well, and Jeff Gibson was wonderful to me. So he was, chair at the time. So just a few people, but I guess it's not something that everybody knows. It's not something that I just,
I thought you said this was 2019. I must have misunderstood.
13.
13.
2013.
Okay, because
Yeah.
I was here back then though, and
Yeah,
Jeff
Yep.
is a supportive kind of guy.
He is. Yeah, it's been 8 years this year. So it has. It'll be 8 years in July.
There's a few more questions in the chat, and L'Oreal asked one but had to step out. So maybe we can come back to hers if we still have time. Fatima asked, how does being in a spousal relationship affect these moms' healing versus being single?
Oh, that's a great question. And that's not one that I've looked into. I didn't give the demographics on how many of the women were single versus married. And I'm not sure I can say that correctly off the top of my head. But that's a great question. And that would be interesting for future research.
Yeah. And for, I know I have a friend who studies parental bereavement, and that social support networks are so crucial, and that they do extend both from in the family as well as the workplace, which would then tie back to some of the things that Jerry was commenting on, you know, regarding how to cultivate social support around this subject. Another question from Lindsay asks, is your goal to get justice and spread the word about grief with police killings? It is not a very talked about subject, which should change.
I would like to see, my goal has become, and it has changed over time, but my goal has become that I want a change in how we police. And I think that starts with communication, putting police officers more out into their communities and talking to the people that they are hired to protect and serve. And by no means am I angry at all police officers. So I don't have an axe to grind about that at all. I just think that there needs to be some change in policing. Since the 90s, when President Clinton was in office, police officers have been armed with semi-automatic weapons. And I understand that has to do with drug trafficking, but I feel like also that policing has become increasingly violent instead of meant to protect. So that I would love to see changes in policing, yes. And I just want to get these mothers' stories out there. So those are that's my twofold goal.
We can address another comment in the chat. That one's from L'Oreal. So, but do others want to offer other comments or questions here in person first?
I think that phenomenon of muting our voices and not sharing grief is also a really interesting theme in your research. And I'm just curious to know if there was a theme of trauma or post-traumatic stress syndrome, that type of experience in these mothers and their family members, because I think that, you know, my own heart and empathy feels that I would relive or, you know, obsess on the experience of my child, and that would probably be traumatizing in itself, you know, going over that footage and those, you know, the cam videos and the scripts and just reliving that in my mind. And I'm just curious to know if, you know, there was any indication in your data that shows that, you know, those women who speak out and who take some action and share their grief, maybe, you know, get on the road to recovery more quickly, or they're probably still coping, like the mothers who said, oh, you know, this is the strength that I project, but, you know, behind my mask, there's this other experience. And I just wondered if you could reflect a little bit more on that.
I would say that the mothers that are active, that take a concrete action, whether it's joining a bereavement group or another type of lobbying group, I think that their healing process is better. I really do. I talked to a few mothers who haven't done anything, and as far as toward therapy or grief counseling or healing, and they are still in their houses, staying there, and they can't, and their coping skills are very low. So I would say that there definitely is healing in movement. As far as PTSD, of course, I'm not a therapist, but I would definitely say PTSD, and that the mothers suffer from this, as well as their children, the siblings of the young men who have been killed. I heard that theme a lot about the effect that it had on the siblings. So I found that I thought that was an interesting thread too, something to follow up on. And yeah, so.
A question from Skylar in the chat says, similarly to what Vicki spoke on, do you think the difficulties mothers face with speaking out about this topic stem more from societal pressures or internal coping mechanisms, or maybe a mix of both?
I think societal pressures more in this group of mothers I spoke to. Many of these women lived in, well, I will say more than half of these women lived in small towns or small cities. And so they felt pressure not to speak out, which I thought was very interesting. The mothers in the larger cities, they've rallied, they've gathered, they've come together, and they speak out quite frequently. But I feel like the mothers, more social pressure not to speak out. Yeah.
This is a little bit different, but is kind of in the same area as the comment left by L'Oreal. She said, I was wondering about the well-meaning miscommunication from others you have experienced. Did some of the mothers experience the same from others?
Yes, they did. People are, I think, just to make a generalization, anyway, when someone dies, it's hard to know what to say to someone about it, even if it's not under traumatic circumstances. So that, just to begin with, is a very difficult thing. People, I heard over and over, I don't know what I would do if it were my child. But finally, one time I said, yeah, I didn't either. What I would do either, and they mean well, they want to empathize with you, but it just really misses the mark. So it's hard. And I feel for the other person.
One thing that I was thinking of as you were talking about some of the shame and the difficulty talking about death and the way that's compounded by certain forms of death. I lost my father to suicide when I was 11, and it's interesting because even when I tell people that now, they're like, oh, I'm sorry. And thank you. Yes, it does still hurt, but I'm 39, and they say it as if it's so recent. And I think it has something to do with the form of death, that it's shocking to hear. But one thing that I seem to be aware of looking back, and there were other shameful circumstances surrounding my father's death, like his sexuality and wanting to hide the fact that he had contracted HIV. And these kinds of shameful conditions, at least in my family, seem to also kind of suppress the memory of the person, like of being able to talk about the person. And so it was almost as if the silencing of his death was a silencing of his life. And I wonder how that ties to what you found, or sort of that impetus to speak out that you then also mentioned.
Yeah, that is a very good point, Roberta, because there is definitely shame in both types of death. One of the things that I did with the mothers when I began to interview them was for them to just tell me stories about their sons, because I did recognize that with the death, because usually what you get is you get some horrible mugshot of your son in the media, and the blame is immediately shifted to your son. And so you lose perspective of him as a person and all the either funny, kind, wonderful things he did. So I asked mothers to tell me stories about their sons. And it was great. It was great just to hear mothers describe how funny or kind or smart their sons were, or how they like to just drive their siblings crazy, you know? So it's nice to be able to see them as a whole person rather than a byline in a newspaper.
Other comments or questions from audience members? I'm not seeing any in the chat. So if that's the case, we can thank Dr. Stevens for her time and wrap up today's presentation. We do have 2 additional presentations this semester in the Women's and Gender Studies Research Series. And the next one is a graduate student showcase on March 18th, I believe is the date, the 3rd Thursday in March. So please join us if you can. In the chat, it says, thank you from Dr. Holling's class. So looks like you had a class joining us. And Vicki says, thank you so much for your bravery and enriching our knowledge of this area. I wanted to close today's presentation because I was so moved by your talk and your topic and your willingness to share this. There's an article by feminist author Sarah Ahmed called Feminist Hurt. And she talks some about there's sort of this societal desire to get over or avoid suffering. And she talks some about the kinds of hurt that might bring us towards feminism and that might bring us towards social justice causes, and not to valorize them, but I think she makes this space that to me feels meaningful in relation to what you've shared. And she says, when I teach about things that still hurt. I am willing this still. When I write, I stay close to the histories of violence. Sometimes I write with tears, in tears. I read the work that reminds me of this hurt. I read about racism, sexism, injury, injustice. These words become lifelines too, allowing me to live on by going on. Hurt still. We are moved because it hurts still. We are not over. It is not over.
That's beautiful.
Thank you. And more thanks from the audience in the chat as well. I'm not sure if you've got those pulled up on your screen.